It feels like today is going to be a little bit of a mix of optimists and skeptics, right? So it's the classic, is the glass half empty, is the glass half full? Information security professionals traditionally have a reputation, well-deserved I might add, for being the glass half empty is kind of people, right? And one of the things that I've always sort of prided myself on is being a little bit different from that, in that you do have to look at the power and the capabilities of new technologies that are out there and all the things that can bring you. But we're also conditioned to look for everything that can go wrong, right? So I'm not a glass half empty, glass half full. I guess I'm kind of the glass is just too big kind of person, right? It's a fascinating time to be working in information security. I've been doing this for 22 years now, and I've never seen anything like the last 12 to 18 months, both in terms of the pace and sophistication that attacks have hit both corporate America and individuals, but also, frankly, the amount of awareness and media coverage of this kind of thing. You have the President of the United States making speeches about this, you have Congress, you have trade wars with China really coming around information security. So the question is, what's happened over the last year or so that's caused all this fervor? And what I start with is, you think about we're conditioned to think about what are the threats that we face and who are the kind of people that are coming after us, right? And if I think about large corporations, at least in the financial industry, we've always thought about three types of threats that face us. Number one is basically disruption of commerce. And what we usually think about here are people we call hacktivists, people that either hate big business or hate America or just don't like individual companies that tend to do things like denial of service attacks or website defacement, really more of a nuisance kind of a thing. We think about WikiLeaks, we think about Anonymous, we think about Occupy Wall Street, that sort of thing. And that's one group. The second group tends to be people that are much more focused on stealing money, right? This is identity theft. This is fraud. This is a very serious problem, but it's one we know how to deal with, and frankly, banks will always make customers whole for this kind of thing. But traditionally, this has been the province of organized crime, of the Eastern European nations, etc. About 5 years ago, we saw a significant increase in what we call nation-state sponsored cyber attacks, right? People that were really focused on stealing intellectual property. What's the latest chip design from Intel? What's the new fighter plane design that Lockheed is working on, etc. Most commonly, and very quickly in the news, all of those conversations very quickly turn to China, right? And the challenge behind that is not so much specific to China or anything, but what happens when you put the entire resources of a nation state behind those kind of attacks, and what can they do? And you see all kinds of corporate espionage going on between different countries to favor bids on companies from different for mining rights or M&A deals or any of that kind of stuff. Now, the challenge we've seen over the last year is really a coupling of that first group and that third group. And I want to point to two specific instances that have happened over the last year. Number one, actually a year and a week ago, not that anybody's counting, you saw a very huge spate of denial of service attacks hit the financial industry. You would have read about in the press and other things like that. Websites are down and people can't get to things and that sort of thing. And what we saw is denial of service attacks hit the industry all the time, hundreds of them a year, et cetera. So what's different? The sophistication of these attacks was somewhere between 10 and 100 times greater than anything we'd ever seen before. And we said, hey, this doesn't feel like the average sort of hacker who hates America and that kind of stuff coming after us. That's fact one. Fact two is there were a number of attacks last year, most notably an attack against Saudi Aramco, big national oil company in Saudi Arabia. It was a simple virus sort of thing. So a virus infects the computers at the oil company. And the way viruses usually work is they're designed to implant a back door or, frankly, steal information and get it out of the firm or any kind of thing. This virus, called the Shamoon virus, existed for the sole purpose of destroying the boot sector of a computer. That's just mean, right? So if you think about it, one day you wake up and 30,000 computers are turned into bricks. So what happens, and if you chart both of those attacks that I just mentioned there, they all chart back to a different set of nation states that have a different motivation behind what they do. So what you see is this migration from disruption to destruction, right? Now, if I interrupt a website let's say it's a banking website. Okay, so the banking website is down. You know what? The ATMs still work. Mobile banking still works. The branches are still there. Plenty of different ways to get your money. What happens now if that's a funds transfer system? What happens if now it's one of the major interchange networks, right? The kind of things that we worry about going forward are much more drastic and much more catastrophic to the industry. So when we think about what's changed over the last year, a couple things that come to mind. Number one is an increase in the pace, sophistication, complexity, and impact of these attacks. Number two is a change in the motivation, right? We never worried about terrorists getting involved in cyber attacks, just frankly wasn't their style, right? Until about a year ago, right? So the motivations are moving from inconvenience to theft and espionage, now outright destruction of technology. And the third point is, frankly, we've gotten pretty good over the last 15, 20 years at protecting computer systems, self-healing operating systems, better secure code design, etc. Well, if the better we get at building computers and securing computers, why should I bother hacking into that system if I can just compromise this person and convince them to give up their password? So you've seen the rise of spear phishing and really targeted phishing attacks at individuals being the source of this. So how does this work? Well, if I look at the nature of these kind of attacks and the way they work today, you get an email. You get an email. You've all gotten an email before. I am the son of a former Nigerian dictator, such and such. And you'd be amazed at the number of people that will click on anything that you put in front of them, right? Click here to get hacked. Ooh, that sounds cool. And there you go. So basically, you have a targeted message, and these targeted messages have gone a long way from the "I am the son of the former Nigerian dictator." Now you get things with an actual logo of a firm with your information. Hey, here's your account. Your account's been compromised. Click here to reset your password. For the love of God, don't click on things that say, click here and we'll give you money, or click here and we'll do other things like that. No reputable company is ever going to send you something like that. If they do, they have a different problem. So that's the first thing. What does that do? It infects your local system. It installs a piece of malware, looks for some level of privilege, administrator rights on a system, your ability to access an individual application, et cetera, and then moves laterally from there. In large corporations, the idea is, I can't compromise the end server, I'll compromise the individual who has access to everything, and I'll just go laterally from there, get the information out of that system, collect as much data as I can, sit lie dormant, monitor activity, and then look to exfiltrate the data and get it out of the firm when nobody's looking, right? So what's interesting is we spent a lot of time over the last decade or so trying to protect the firm from bad outsiders trying to get it. We've gotten very good at that. Then we realized, hey, we all work for very large companies. A lot of people work here. You kind of have to worry about the bad insider as well. The Aramco attack is a good example. They had inside help. Now the problem is, with this kind of an attack, you have to worry about, is that a niche, or is that somebody pretending to be a niche? Now I got to worry about the bad outsider who's compromised a good insider, who looks like the good insider but is actually a bad outsider, and my head's going to explode, right? So how do you do that? And what's interesting about this is if you look at all the major attacks that have been in the news over the last year, well, I'm going back to the Operation Aurora attack, which was at Google and McAfee about 4 years ago, or the Aramco attack I mentioned, or one that actually caused a lot of people to sit up straight. There was an attack against RSA, a big security company, a number of years ago, 2 years ago. And it turns out the attackers weren't targeting RSA. RSA makes security tokens. They were trying to break into defense contractors, couldn't break in because the security tokens they use, so let's just break into the security company, get the tokens, and use those to break into the defense contractors. Again, your head's going to explode. So you worry about the supply chain and all of the extensions of firms and what we do around that. Now, when we look at emerging technologies, that idea of the extended enterprise or the adoption of the cloud, this is a slide we generally talk about as the we now live in the era of cloud, mobile, data, social. It's all anybody wants to talk about. Every talk you go to is going to have one of those 4 words. At least so far they have, right? So when you think about the cloud and you extend the environment, it's an incredibly powerful capability. Whether it be iCloud, lose your phone, get a new phone, all your data is back right away. Great. But from an enterprise point of view, from a corporate point of view, the challenge you get for people that are in my role is how do you control data when you don't control the data, right? Every large bank in the US is required by law to notify customers if there's been a breach of their data. And what every major firm will tell you is 99 times out of 100, when that's happened, it's not because the bank has been compromised, it's because one of the suppliers has been compromised. Now, it doesn't matter, it's the bank's fault. We went through all that kind of stuff. But it really does cause you to stop and think before you do adopt a lot of those things. How do you protect things that you don't protect, that you don't control, right? Mobile. There's a meme that makes the rounds around Facebook about every 6 months that you may have seen. It says, if somebody from the 1950s were transported to today, what would be the hardest thing for them to understand? And basically says, I hold in my pocket a device that's capable of harnessing the entirety of information ever known to mankind. And I use it to share pictures of cats and get in arguments with strangers. Having said that, right, think about mobile commerce. Think about life before smartphones. This is really only about 5 years old, right? How did we possibly live before that, right? What you do have to worry about is, what's running on this? And when you're looking at, on the other side of receiving end of commerce, has the device been jailbroken? Has it been compromised, right? I will tell you, we are no different from any other firm out there, have pulled multiple dozens of fake banking applications off the Android market, right? Look exactly like, have all the logos, look exactly like a banking app, have nothing to do with the bank, right? How do you do that? How do you apply the same sort of controls that you do internally within a firm to things that come out there? Now, the flip side to that is, for all the noise about mobile being the next big security problem, this is an incredibly powerful device. How about we harness it for security? Think about it. I did take with note Dave's crack about the IBM password policy, and I know a person who has my job at IBM, and I'll speak to her later about that. But regardless, why do I need a password? I have a device here. It's got a microphone. It's got a GPS. It's got a camera. It's got a fingerprint reader, right? This is where authentication is going to head. You walk in, it notices the presence of your phone. You authenticate with it. We do it already. We use it for password resets. I speak my voice into the phone. It registers, resets my password automatically. Think about walking up to an ATM machine with a phone in your pocket. It senses the presence. All of a sudden, you don't need a PIN code anymore. That coupled with some sort of biometric, right? Very powerful capability there as well. Big data is something you'll, again, hear a lot about. And, it's amazing in the age of big data that half of the Groupons I get still seem to be for things like bikini waxes and pole dancing. So I like to tell myself that's a big data problem, but maybe they are profiling better than I think they are. But regardless, it does offer tremendous power, for any organization that wants to provide very targeted, focused messaging to their customers. The flip side is, as an individual, do I want all that data in one place? Do I want all that data about my entire life in one place? There's a little bit of concentration risk. It's just one place for people to go after, right? And frankly, there's a fine line between targeted and just creepy, right? Do I want companies to know that much about me, right? And this gets to that fine line we always run into between security and privacy. Having said that, we do use data in security, and I'll close on this here as we go forward, is we have incredible capabilities to use this for security purposes. I was talking to a colleague from another firm who says, we know somebody's going to leave the firm 2 weeks before they actually quit. I said, well, that's pretty cool. How do you do that? Well, it's simple. They update the resume. They go update all their benefits. They send all their email home. They send all the documents they're working on, et cetera. So then we use that and say, okay, that's great. I went back to our guys and said, how will we do that? I said, well, let's look for people sending a whole bunch of stuff home. How exactly do you look for a whole bunch of stuff, right? So what we've been able to do is create profiles for individuals and say, okay, a whole bunch of stuff for you is different for you, it's different for you, but if you differ from your own general pattern by more than 4 standard deviations, maybe that's worth looking into. And the final thing I'll say is, looking at a lot of the trends out there, there's a common theme you're going to see up here, right? When everything's connected, we can get much more intelligence, but when everybody knows everything about you, privacy's kind of dead. When you think about autonomous computing, great, incredibly powerful capability until the first self-driving car gets hacked or Skynet takes over. Take your pick on which way you look at that, right? Oh, and by the way, I think privacy's kind of dead, right? Google Glass, another great example. Tremendously powerful. Overlay, the whole Erasmus thing is incredibly powerful. Until you realize anybody, anywhere, has access to anything in the environment, in that case, privacy gets kind of dead, right? And it's this challenge we always have of how much security do you want and how much privacy do you want? Everyone wants privacy until there's some sort of security issue, and then everyone wants security until there's some sort of privacy issue, and that's the thing we go back and forth, right? So we do talk excessively about an arms race here. There's two arms races I'll talk about. Number one is the trade-off between are the hackers getting better, or are the defenders getting better? I like to think we're winning that one, although there are days when I'm not so sure. And secondly is, how do we strike that line between security and privacy, right? But again, in that sort of glass is half full sort of thing. On this one, I am glass half full. As an individual, I very much want my privacy. As a corporate executive, I really do want a lot of security in that space. But it's an evolving effort, and again, like I said, I like to think we're winning this one. Thanks very much.
This probably looks like gibberish to you, and it should, because it's a cryptogram, a message in code. But if I told you that all I did was shift every letter in the sentence to the next one in the alphabet, then you'd know that it translates to this. To encrypt a message, you need two main parts, the cipher and the key. The cipher is the set of rules that you're using to encode the information, for example, shifting the alphabet by a certain number of letters. The key tells you how to arrange those rules, otherwise they'd be the same every time and it would be easy to decode the message. In this case, the key would be 1, because we shifted the alphabet by 1 letter. To decrypt the information, you need to know what kind of cipher was used and also have the key. Or you can just crack the code, either by trying all possible combinations you can think of, or by analyzing the code and working backward from it, known as deciphering. But is it possible to come up with a combination of a cipher and key that could never be determined? Is there such a thing as an unbreakable code? Well, people keep coming up with new and better ciphers, but it's hard to make them unbreakable. Because no matter what, you're using a set of rules to encrypt the information, and with enough time and enough data, someone can usually uncover those rules. That puzzle I just gave you is one of the oldest and simplest ways to encrypt a message. It's usually called a Caesar cipher, and in this case, the key was just a number representing how many letters of the alphabet I shifted it. But it's also very easy to crack. Even if you didn't know the key, it would take you at most 25 tries to decode the message, because you know that the whole alphabet has to be shifted by a certain amount. Since there are 26 letters in the alphabet, there are only 25 other options. A Caesar cipher is one simple type of monoalphabetic cipher, a class of ciphers where the whole code is based on one letter of the alphabet standing in for another letter, consistently throughout the whole message. Basically, you just scramble the alphabet. In that case, the key would just be a list of which letters correspond to which, like this one. There are over 400 septillion possible ways to encrypt this kind of message, so you'd think it would be hard to crack. And it is, but only a little bit. Because there are lots of ways to decode messages. Just trying all of the possible keys to a code is probably the most obvious and least subtle, and it has an equally unsubtle name: brute force. But you can try a more sophisticated technique, something called frequency analysis, which is based on the idea that every language has its own specific patterns. In English, for example, the letter E shows up a lot. I used it 7 times in just the last sentence. And some words, like the, are so common that it's hard to even use a sentence without them. Cryptographers call these words cribs. So frequency analysis looks for common words and also common letters or sets of letters like ed or ing at the end of words. If you find that the letter X is showing up a lot in a message, and so is the 3-letter word IRX, you might guess that in the key, X corresponds to the letter E and IRX spells the. And once you've figured out those letters, you can figure out the rest by recognizing other words and using the process of elimination. And since longer cryptograms contain more clues, they're easier to crack. So monoalphabetic ciphers are fun, but they're not hard to break. If you want to get a little fancier with your encryption, you can use polyalphabetic ciphers instead. They're much more effective. In a polyalphabetic cipher, the way you scramble the alphabet actually changes throughout the message. In the first word, S might translate to W, but in the last word, S might translate to H. It all depends on the particular encryption method you're using, and on your key. One of the earliest polyalphabetic ciphers was the Vigenère cipher. Developed in the 16th century, it was pretty simple because the key was just a word. So let's say you want to encrypt "SciShow is the greatest" using a Vigenère cipher. Well, the first thing you need to do is write out a Vigenère square. The alphabet goes across the top and along the left side, and each row contains the letters A to Z shifted over by 1. So the first line starts with A and ends with Z, but the second starts with B, goes all through the letters until Z, and then ends with A, and so on. You end up with 26 differently scrambled alphabets, and now you're ready to encode the message. You just have to pick a key. Let's just say your key is Michael. You write out your key multiple times until it fills the same number of letters as your message. So "SciShow is the greatest" would correspond to this. Then to encrypt it, you take each letter of the message and move along its row in the Vigenère square until you get to the column of the corresponding letter in Michael. So "SciShow is the greatest" turns into this. That's much tougher to decode unless you have the key, because those letter frequencies are all different now. Since the keyword Michael is 7 letters long, each letter of your message is encrypted using 7 different scrambled alphabets. But if your text is long enough, it's still crackable using a type of frequency analysis developed in the 19th century by cryptographer Charles Babbage. Babbage realized that in a long enough message, some patterns in the coded message will still show up. Like if your key only has 7 letters, that means that there are only 7 ways to encrypt the word the. But if your message uses the word the 8 times, there are definitely going to be repeats. So he just counted how many letters separated those repeated patterns. If they were separated by 7, 14, or 21 letters, he knew that the key was probably 7 letters long. And from there, he would just use frequency analysis to figure out the 7 scrambled alphabets. Babbage's method is just one example of why it's so hard to create an unbreakable cipher. Your key creates a pattern within the encrypted message, and with enough work, a spy can uncover that pattern. It turns out that the only way to have a really unbreakable cipher is to use what's known as a one-time pad encryption, which uses a key that is as long as the message itself. That way, there aren't any patterns in the encrypted text. There's nothing to analyze, so there's no way to work backwards. The sender and the recipient both have the same pad, and each sheet contains a long set of random letters, which is used as the key. Once a sheet is used to decode a message, you destroy it. Then you use the next sheet for the next message, so you never repeat a key. As long as you keep the pad safe, the message can't be decrypted by anyone else. But you can't always use one-time pad encryption. Let's say you needed to get a message to someone halfway across the world whom you'd never met. You wouldn't have a chance to give them a matching pad. In warfare, that sort of situation comes up a lot, which is why in the early 20th century there was suddenly plenty of incentive to come up with better ciphers. Remote communication, using technology like the telegraph, was incredibly valuable during wartime, but it was essential that only your allies understood what you were saying. The Germans experimented with a new, more complicated monoalphabetic cipher during World War I, but eventually the French managed to crack it. Then, during World War II, the Germans again came up with a new cipher, and this time, its security seemed perfect. Maybe you've heard of it. The Enigma machine. The machine used a polyalphabetic cipher that scrambled the alphabet in a different way each time you typed a new letter. As far as the Germans knew, the only way to decipher the message was to have your own Enigma machine and set it up using a secret key that changed every day. The machine was meant to work like a one-time pad in the sense that the alphabet was re-scrambled for every letter of the message. But instead of having to distribute a set of sheets to everyone, you could just use a key that told the users how to set up their Enigma machines, and you could change that key as often as you wanted. But it had a few flaws. For example, no letter could be encoded as itself. That might not sound like a big deal, but it ended up being a fatal weakness. British mathematician Alan Turing, along with the rest of his team, designed a machine of their own that could crack the Enigma code, as long as they knew around 20 of the characters contained in the message. Which they often did, because some phrases tended to show up a lot in Nazi communiques, especially nice things about Hitler. So part of the strategy of Turing's team was to look for cribs, those common words and phrases, and see where they might fit. For instance, if they knew a message contained the word Führer, they could look for places in the text that didn't have the letter F, since they knew that the F in Führer couldn't be encoded as itself. Those clues helped them figure out how the Enigma rotors were set up to encrypt the message. Cracking the Enigma code was a huge advantage for the Allies. Many historians attribute some of the most important victories during the war to information the Allies got from the Enigma encrypted messages. These days, encryption is mostly important in digital computing, and that isn't perfect either. When websites announce that hackers now know everything about you, that's because their encryption methods were breakable. Companies that store your data have to take into account a whole new set of considerations, like how when you can complete billions of operations per second, brute force suddenly becomes a lot more practical. So the same principles that Vigenère and Turing used are the same ones that allow you to pay your bills online and keep North Korea out of your email, most of the time. But how is a story for another episode. Thank you for watching this episode of SciShow, which was brought to you by our patrons on Patreon. If you want to help us keep making videos like this, check out patreon.com/scishow, and don't forget to go to youtube.com/scishow and subscribe.
When we visit a website that features that little padlock in the corner of our browser, we're trusting it to keep our data safe. And whether it's our credit card numbers, sensitive work documents, or those questionable photos that you told your friend not to take, various types of encryption standards ensure that they are kept out of the prying hands of intruders, whatever, while they zip around on the internet. But aside from the reassuring little icon on your computer screen, what's actually going on? What is encryption? All right, so while today's video focuses on encryption on the web specifically, and the procedures used for encrypting data can be massively complex, the fundamental idea behind all encryption is really quite simple. Whenever you transfer encrypted information, your computer turns that data into an unintelligible mess or ciphertext that can only be put back into a readable form by unlocking it with a key of some sort that tells the receiving computer how to decode the incoming message. This basic concept has actually been used to send secret messages since long before the invention of computers. Ciphers of various kinds have been used for thousands of years, and machines that could encode and decode messages were in use before the modern PC ever came along. Thomas Jefferson invented a wheel cipher that was nothing more than wooden discs around an axle. And then the Germans famously used a typewriter-like device called the Enigma machine to encrypt military messages during World War II, although the Allies were able to crack that code. Now back to the web era. Modern electronics often use a widespread encryption scheme called public key encryption. Suppose you want to send an email. When you click send, the receiving computer will provide your computer with what's called a public key. A public key is generated by the computer just randomly choosing a very large number and running it through some mathematical functions. Once your computer receives this public key, it uses the key to lock the email using a special algorithm, then sends it on its way. Now, since anyone can request a public key from a computer, the public key can't be used to unlock a message. Otherwise, anyone could intercept and read your encrypted emails. That would defeat the purpose purpose. Instead, the recipient's computer unlocks the message with a private key that is stored on that system alone, making it mercifully impossible for anyone else to view the terrible poetry you sent to your girlfriend that has her rethinking things. Public key encryption isn't just used for email. It's actually the basis of tons of websites that require you to sign in securely. If you've ever clicked on that little padlock and saw a mention of SSL or TLS, these are two implementations of public key encryption that are widely used by Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and many more to make sure that only you can access your data or change your settings. Now, once the sensitive data actually arrives at its destination, there are a number of other encryption methods used to make sure it can sit on the computer or server safely. For example, you probably have a password and credit card number stored with Amazon, for example. How do they keep those things safe? Often web servers will hash your passwords, meaning that they're converted into encrypted strings of text through a process that is extremely difficult to reverse and can't be unlocked with a key. Now, with all that said, it is important to remember that no system of encryption is perfect, and experts in the field are constantly searching for weaknesses in encryption algorithms and devising new ones to outsmart hackers. So next time you're G-chatting a friend about how awesome the latest episode of Tech Quickie was, remember that it was really an epic digital arms race that allowed you to do that without everyone knowing exactly how much of your free time you spend listening to me talk. Speaking